Hey guys, what is up? Unrested back again with another JFAQ here to answer a question. When I did the JFAQ on worries I have about Japan, I got a couple questions that were asking about the media section that I did, and I had talked about that I was worried about the future of Japanese media, movies, etc. And I had one commenter say, well, Scott, like you always talk about how much you love Japanese horror movies and that one of the reasons you came to Japan was because their type of horror was one of the biggest inspirations. Why do you have so many critical statements to say about the media industry now? How has it changed? What did you like in the past? And, what is it about now that concerns you and makes you not enjoy it as much? And that's a great question. Of course, I didn't have as much time in that one as I am going to in this video because I was going through multiple topics. But if you're okay with me going off on a tangent about what I see and what I've learned about within Japanese media, I think I can help you discover a little bit more about where everything's going with Japanese movies here in Japan. I'm gonna mostly talk about horror movies because that's the ones I'm most familiar with. Don't get me wrong, I try to watch a little bit of everything. Yes, I even watch anime movies. Yes. I even watch like dramas, like family type dramas, like Sisters of the Ocean and The Shoplifters. I don't know what else has come out recently. One Cut of the Dead. Well, that's recent, but that's a horror movie again. But I try to watch a little bit of everything. And yes, there are movies outside of horror that I thoroughly enjoy that are Japanese. Of course, the ones that won the biggest awards like Confessions or Departures, those are excellent movies and I thoroughly enjoyed those as well. Another series of movies that I really enjoy that's actually had, I think, a part 1 and 2 and now a series on Netflix is Ushijima-kun, The Lone Collector. And if you have not watched the movies that were originally created for that character, I highly suggest them. They are, I guess, a mix between like true crime, drama, and thriller, maybe I would say. But they're not a horror movie, but the intensity of the actor who plays that character is top notch. He's one of the few actors, I gotta say, that really nails the acting for how that character should be played out. It follows the manga that it's based on to a T. It's amazing. So if you're looking for a series that is not horror, that is kind of a mix between, there's like a little bit of action, a little bit of thriller, a little bit of drama, some love stories, but a very real look at how loans are collected by loan sharks in Japan. And that's probably the most exciting part of the whole thing. Anyway, let me get into it. I don't want to ramble too long. It's been, I guess, a matter of a fact that there's multiple movies Americans mention over and over again for what is great from Japan. One thing I always find very interesting is that the first anime I hear a lot of people mention is Akira, and it's by the same director who did Freedom and Metropolis. And if you say that word here, if you say the movie called Akira here in Japan, it's based on the same manga series. The manga series came out first. They know of the movie, Japanese people do, but it was not like epically popular like it was in America. When you say it, they're like, oh, Akira? Oh, I think I've seen that. Yeah, I've seen that. Like, it'd be like if you said an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie and they'd be like, The Terminator, and you're like, no, True Lies, and someone's like, oh, True Lies. Oh, I've seen True Lies, or like Last Action Hero, where it's like, he made it, but it's not his most popular thing. That's how Akira gets kind of tossed around here. So I always find that very amazing. But what I have noticed is even in America, people tend to talk about the same couple movies over and over again. When I hear even Japanese movies tossed around, especially when it comes to ones that are not anime. Now, anime, I think, is constantly developing and actually constantly getting better as far as movies are concerned. As far as TV is concerned, I'm sorry, but it's just garbage. One of the worst aspects for anime for TV is that they literally carbon copy the same type of characters over and over again, switch some uniforms, switch some suits. You got the same 4 princesses, the same 4, AKB-48 looking girls. You got the same 4 dudes dressing up as like Hanshin heroes who can transform. You got the same little ninjas. Then you got your set of like cartoons from 40 years old that are like, Gegege no Kitaro, the little, I forget what the one character's name is, who always shows his butt and wiggles around. That's great that they have those, but they haven't changed in like literally decades upon decades upon decades. And I guess that's good for like kids entertainment. If you're an adult though, there's like absolutely nothing you can get out of those. There isn't a lot of cartoon series on the TV. Now, I'm not saying like Netflix and stuff like that, or Hulu, or whatever service provider you have for videos and stuff. As far as stuff that's just syndicate on TV and fresh and new for TV, there's not a lot you would ever want to follow here in Japan. It's pretty much garbage carbon copy stuff that they just do the same thing over and over again and slightly change whatever the theme is each year that it comes out. Does it sell? Yeah, because it's for little kids. Those little kids grow out of it. They buy all the toys that they want when they're like 4 and 5 years old, and then they grow out of it and never touch the series again. I can understand why Japan does this. I mean, this must be a huge money grabber. Also, there's no like rules that can say you can't have this amount of advertising during kids' cartoons. I know in America we have this very regulated where you can't show very many toy advertisements along with the cartoon, because they actually had a problem back in the 80s where it was like every advertisement was like, buy the toy, buy the toy. You should also buy the toy. Did you like the cartoon? Buy the toy. In Japan, that's the way it still is. Like, you will literally never see a commercial for a kid until a cartoon comes on, and then they just bomb you with like everything. You can't imagine how many products you can make for a kid's cartoon. There's candy, there's clothes, there's wands, there's shoes, there's study materials, there's miniature tablets that have the characters on them. It's insanity. It's all about selling a hunk of plastic, and cool, I get it. Do I respect it? Not really. And half the time, like, it almost looks like an algorithm puts these cartoons together. I mean, they're cell shading over a 3D model, which is pretty obvious. Maybe they use some mocap because some of the characters, especially for the ending sequences, seem to move pretty realistically, especially like when they have dances and stuff. But I mean, it looks like pretty minimal work. Like, you could move a character like you would in Flash from one frame to another, and the computer would fill in the rest. Now, again, I'm not comparing this to the movies in Japan. Anime movies, I think, honestly, they continue to amaze me. Everything that comes out is more or less like getting better and better at the art. A lot of the artists stay old school, and even if they are forced into 3D animation, they draw cell over it or paint cell over it, or, still paint their own backgrounds. I have seen with some manga that people are upset because they'll take a picture and then digitally filter like the background. You may have noticed sometimes in Gantz, there's some backgrounds where you're like, dude, did you just like take a picture and like put it in a Photoshop filter? I don't think they have, but I think what they have done is done a very quick sort of line over picture drawing to make it work really fast. But I think with manga, I really have a lot of sympathy because those poor artists like work 24/7. Like, they literally eat like one bowl of ramen a day and then just draw until their hands like about fall off their body. A lot of them don't leave their studios. They have like a bed in their studio to sleep there. It's insanity. Their working conditions are pretty harsh. And then you see how many mangas they pump out. I mean, how many did Gantz have? How many did that series have? Like 250 plus? I never even finished reading it. It was so many. But getting into like live action movies, now this is where Japan really has started to fall apart. There used to be a time, and I'm sure most of you know if you have any kind of history knowledge of Japan, Kurosawa is well known for being one of the best directors, and there has yet to be another Kurosawa filmmaker, director, someone on his level. And if you look up anything about him, if you don't know who the director Kurosawa is, I would just recommend you watch all his movies if you want to see where a lot of techniques that are used in modern day Hollywood, especially like Quentin Tarantino uses a lot of these Kurosawa techniques. I mean, a lot of stuff came from this guy. He was like an epicenter of movie knowledge and tricks and trades. And it seems like that's been kind of tossed to the side after Japan's whole film industry was taken over by like corporate greed. And I think that's where you see a lot of problems. I don't want to necessarily blame it on the creators or blame it on the actors or even the script writers, I think what you're dealing with, especially when you look at a movie that's been converted from a manga or an anime to a movie like Attack on Titan, do you guys remember how awful that was? You're seeing a lot of corporate interference. Maybe the original script was written far better or very close to the knowledge of the manga, but you constantly have interference from corporate who not only funds the movie, but decides what they want to fund and who they want to choose. So for example, the director may already have an excellent actor chosen, but one thing that happens so much in Japan, and it's so annoying, the corporate people will choose somebody from like a pop group, a J-pop group. Like, I remember watching this horror movie called The Black Lily Apartment, and the one actor in it was just an actor who had always acted. It was the male actor in it, but the female was Achan from AKB48. And I mean, the girl just, maybe she can sing and dance okay, but that girl cannot act. I mean, she was never meant to be an actor. All of her scenes of her screaming and crying and acting anguished and upset are just, they're painful to get through, because you're just like, oh my God, what are you like reading the script like just off screen? This is horrible. I mean, it was the kind of acting that if you ever imagine hearing your friends practice for a drama at high school where they would like read the lines like, oh no, I am sad. My baby has died. Ah, that is very bad. I am also sad for you. Like that's like literally how her acting was. It was so horrible. And this is corporate interference. The Toei company, I think that was in charge of the movie at the time, decided, oh, you know what would make this super popular? Let's get a J-pop idol to be in this movie, and everyone will want to come see it. And they probably did pull a decent Japanese audience of fanboys to the movie, but internationally, I mean, it's mocked. Internationally, if they would never send this movie around to like any kind of critical appeal or fanfare or film contest or anything like that, because they'd be laughed out of the theater. It's awful. It's horrible. And I feel like budget restrictions have also started to really affect. It seems that TV's become little more than movies have become little more than an extension of TV shows here in Japan. There's even points where TV shows get made into movies, which sometimes it works, like Neko Taxi, which that turned out to be quite good as a movie. But then if you try to take more aggressive dramas, like there's a lot of crime in hospital dramas in Japan, and they try to turn it into a movie, and it just gets like crazy ridiculous. I don't know the name of the one movie, but it was so laughably bad that any Japanese person I talked to would laugh when they would see the poster. It started out as a crime drama, and they kept adding more and more criminal elements to it. And the criminals got more and more extravagant, like the ideas that they would make up. They started out as simple stuff that you would know in real life, like murderers and robbers and bank heists and stuff like that. But eventually they started to make their criminals like into almost like super villains. Like there was like a famous J-idol pop actress who she played some sort of villain who had metal teeth, like a Bond villain. It got like so goofy. And by the time it made it to theaters, people were just like, why would I see this trash? It bombed, it didn't do good at all. And sadly, the thing that I like most, horror movies, are headed down the same road. If you go back to like late 1990s and you watch horror from Japan, it is exquisite. You got Takashi Miike, you've got the best of the best making just absolutely gruesome splatterpunk. You got Tokyo Gore Police, you got Robo Geisha, you got, what else? Audition, Ichi the Killer, or Ichi no Satsujin, I think it's called in Japanese. And they're just like, they were critical successes in America because they just blew us away. The ideas were just so outlandish. The amount of blood they used were so outlandish. The effects they used were all like air bladder or like spray effects or, proper actual makeup put on people for the injuries and stuff like that, or the masks or whatever, like, weird creatures they wanted to make. It was all practical effects. There was no CGI involved. Now, I'm not saying CGI is the worst thing ever. I've seen movies that use CGI properly and it can sometimes really add to things to make it look incredible. I mean, look at the Christopher Nolan movies. It's a mix between practical effects and CGI, and he has the perfect balance, and I'd say most of what he makes is pretty incredible. Here in Japan, it feels like all practical effects have been abandoned in any type of movie at all. Um, it seems like the lowest possible budget is made for every movie that's ever coming out. It seems like the entire budget of the movie is then spent on one actor, well, I say actor, one choice of person to be the main actor who's actually from a pop idol group, which in turn ends up just destroying the entire movie. I mean, very few of these pop idols were meant to be actors and actresses. Like it's just not their calling. They might be amazing singers, they might be amazing dancers. Once in a while you'll get one like Nino from Arashi, who in Letters of Iwo Jima was an amazing actor, but that is the absolute exception and not the most common aspect of these actors. So you deal with like just a lot of piss poor, dry acting, and Japan has struggled with this. There's actually been like studies done to try and get a certain type of acting that some say, oh, well, because we used to do kabuki and we have, you know, our nogaki and stage plays that people express a lot of facial emotion, like, you know, they even wear the paints and everything to do that. We're so used to overacting to show an audience because we didn't have a screen, and that's kind of propagated up into videos. And I mean, if you watch like movies, like sometimes the villains still laugh like they're a vaudeville villain. Like they'll be like, "That's why I've done that," or like one person has like a mental break and they start like randomly cackling because they've had a mental break. That would be great if I was like in the 1920s at a vaudeville, you know, epic. Like that's not how people believe others actually act in today's world. Like if you started doing that, they'd be like, okay, crazy, I'm just gonna leave. You know, you're losing the plot here. Or are you just like trolling me? Like what's going on right now? Why are you laughing like that? But you literally deal with this kind of very 1950s like vaudevillian, just absolute extreme stage acting where it seems like they didn't think they had a camera to look into and were staring at an audience that was like, you know, up in the balcony seats trying to hope they can see the expression on their face by overacting. And this is not completely true. What Japan has had a big problem with is there isn't a current modern day school of acting. So when we go to America, we think of California, you know, or New York for schools that actually have like legit acting schools that will teach you to act. You can get an acting coach. You know, in France, I think they even have like one special school that like, if you're going to get into like French films, you go to that school and then they pick you from that school, if I'm correct. I mean, I don't know a lot about France. You know, if you're a French watcher, tell me if I've got that wrong. But a lot of countries, this is how it works. They have exclusive places that make sure you're top notch enough to be picked from a litter of people who've been professionally trained. You know, once in a while, someone sneaks through who's like, I've just always been good at acting. And it's like, yeah, you're right. You really are really naturally good at acting, and we let you in. But mostly, unless the movie's like a total cheese fest or a very, very campy movie, we expect some sort of level of exquisite acting. I mean, I would say probably some of our worst actors in America are better than some of what's considered the best actors in Japan. Sorry, Japan, that's true. And what a lot of directors and movie makers and even movie companies have stated is that we've never started a modern school of acting in Japan. There's a couple like low-key schools in Tokyo that haven't really caught up to what they know. Like they've been taking some old stuff they have from like the traditional type acting there is in Japan, which doesn't, as we've already spoken about, translate to movie or TV. They've even tried sending Japanese actors over to America, and that didn't work either because they said they would come back and act like somebody they weren't in Japan for a movie that didn't make any sense for a person to act American. And I can totally see why that would be. That acting American in an American way and learning American expressions wouldn't work at all for the situations Japanese people are in or how they would naturally react to things in Japan. A lot of our American expressions are far more forceful, They're overblown, they're a lot more dramatic, whereas Japanese people tend to hold in their feeling and silently boil sometimes or brood, even when they need to express very, very large feelings like an outburst of sympathy or emotion for sadness or being overwrought. These will not immediately come out, especially when it's in the public situation. And I think this makes it a very difficult study for them and a very difficult thing to learn how to progressively teach and act out on film of modern day films. So I'm not blaming the Japanese for the way they are acting. I'm actually more so blaming the establishment and institution that hasn't caught up to what is needed for these movies. So I think if something progressive starts to happen, and I think you'll eventually see something pop up, probably in Tokyo first, maybe eventually in Osaka here, that will start to get some better actors going, I hope. But here's my last little thing, my last little bit of input. And I think there's a lot of stale ideas in Japanese movies and TV shows. And I, again, don't blame the actors and I don't blame the directors. What I would blame is, number one, greedy corporations. And sadly, I hope people don't get angry about this, I'm gonna blame how old the generation is here in Japan. Japan is mostly populated by a very old generation of Japanese people. The elderly far outnumber the young here. And because of that, I think if you came to Japan right now and started to watch TV shows, you would notice like a lot of the colors, the backgrounds, the way things are presented, the lack of technology in TV shows is very like 1980s, 1990s, because it hasn't progressed. Because if they get too progressive and too bound with new technology, they've moved past their captive audience of the elderly generation. You still have things here where presenters bring out marker boards and peel stickers off to present information on things. They don't use a smart board that is like a giant tablet where they can just touch it and move things around, because a lot of old people in Japan never switched over to smartphones. They stayed with flip phones because smartphones were too difficult to understand, too hard to learn. You'll see a lot of old people who never converted to smartphones. A lot of stuff about the internet is never talked about on TV here because a lot of people don't have internet in their home. I know that sounds crazy. Japan's got some of the best internet ever. It's super fast here. Your ping is going to be insanely low if you play online games here. Why do a lot of people not have internet? It's because phones. Again, phones, okay? Phones are the number one thing people use to surf the internet, to play video games, to talk on chat boards, to make videos, to make YouTube. They use phones, man. Phones are way more popular than computers here. And a lot of time they have their internet service through only their phone. So why would they also have a Wi-Fi connection in their house? It makes sense, I get it. But this has really, really stopped a lot from progressing. You'll also see like a lot of the movies that come out, the ideas are movies that are just like pale knockoffs of everything else that comes off. I mean, how many damn ghosts are we gonna see with black hair in front of their face walking around with a white sheet? That was real cool in Ringu. That was real cool in the Edo era. Let's get something new out here, Japan, okay? All right, to end this, I'm just gonna talk a little bit about a horror movie I recently watched that really let me know how down the grade of Japanese movies have gone, and that was a new horror movie called Lily Liver. It's not something I recommend. And it's just a really prime example of how bad Japanese movies have gotten. First of all, there's all these, I'd say like high school actors. They're probably actually 20 years old, but they look like high school kids because everybody looks younger in Japan. Healthy diets, that's why. And it pretty much deals with the story of bullies in a high school. And it's a girl in a small Inaka countryside high school dealing with bullies, and eventually they push it too far. I don't want to spoil too much, so I won't tell you how they push the bullying too far, but it's definitely a situation where anyone would be like, yeah, that's too far, that's messed up. And she goes about getting her revenge. Now, I'm not spoiling anything when I say, you know she's gonna get revenge. Like, you know this whole movie's built around this. If you don't know what lily liver means, lily liver is a flower that is one of the first ones to grow when winter has not ended. So that means it is a metaphor for her spirit being something that continues to fight and survive in conditions that are far too harsh for it in others. So that's why it's called lily liver. She's like the lily liver flower. And because of this, she goes around getting her revenge in a couple ways that are just kind of ludicrous. Like, so to give you an example, she's pushed down into a ditch every day that she walks home by bullies from her school. During that time, one of the bullies drops an X-Acto knife, a razor, like the box cutting knife. And it starts snowing a few days later. Most of the stuff that got dropped during this fight, this bullying, gets buried in snow. And finally, after the bullying goes too far, the next time she's pushed down in the ditch, she reaches under the snow and grabs this X-Acto knife and starts attacking the girls and killing them. And you're like, whoa, that's a really smart plot point. I never thought about that. She did drop that. We really noticed that in the old scenes. So that totally makes sense that she remembered that was there. It shows her character is, inclined to make very quick and decisive movements. There's a plot connection that makes sense and is kind of, intuitive to the movie, that she would only use what's around her as a resource. But then what happens from there is she continues to pull weapons out later in the movie under the snow that you're like, I never saw this weapon drop. Like at one point she pulls out a crossbow and you're like, seriously, somebody dropped a crossbow in the snow and she picked it up and she knew it was there and she used it? Like, what? And she got pushed down into the exact spot that someone dropped this like, it was cool the first time, but when you use it again and again and again to make your entire movie and it starts to get into like ridiculous sized weapons, like I expected her to eventually like, push over a snowman and find a bazooka at some point. It got so ridiculous. On top of it, the worst, the absolute worst, she gets into fights with these different people in the movie and they're supposed to be very realistic fights. The way people fight is very real. But they decided to go with CGI blood. And there's some really goofy, campy horror movies where I think CGI blood is okay. You're gonna do like Tokyo Gore Police. We know everything's crazy, super fake, and we're gonna just laugh when we see large amounts of CGI blood. But this was supposed to be kind of like a drama / horror, very serious, tense mood. And like you see these giant spurts of like blood that looks like it was added later in like Microsoft Paint. It is garbage. It is utter garbage. And then of course the same blood that's like splashing out of them, like, like they just were clicking some sort of GIF image over and over again. It doesn't stain their clothes. It's not all over their bodies. It's not leaking all over the white snow on the ground. It's just trash. So I think you can probably find the movie for free somewhere on YouTube. It's that bad. It's as bad as Onigoko, or the real Onigoko, or the real Tag. I don't know if you've seen that one. That's another one with just horrible acting, a plot that you're just like, who wrote this? Like a 3-year-old? It's garbage. Check those out if you want to see how far Japan has fallen as far as media is concerned in the movie. Until next time, if you have any more questions like the one I was given for this one, I'll be happy to answer it and delve into it deeper and do some research. Media is something I'm very passionate about. I'll talk to you again soon.